So this afternoon we have the next session is about comparing coffee cultures. Coffee is a beverage that is consumed by many cultures, but what we call the sociology of coffee, its social function, varies quite a bit from culture to culture. In Sweden, coffee is overwhelmingly associated with a social situation called fika. In preparing for this symposium, Chandani and I came across something called the Fika Academy, and we said, really? We have to hear more about that, which is a branding initiative on the part of the Swedish government that promotes that the idea of Swedes drinking coffee in a particular way is a cultural and national resource. That got our curiosity going. What does it mean to brand a cultural practice? And if the point of branding is to sell it, is fika really something that can travel? Or is it quintessentially Swedish and bound to its home culture? Is it a reason to come to Sweden, or is it something to emulate elsewhere? As we locals know, Northern California is a home for coffee as well. Berkeley is well known for the founding of Peet's Coffee, not far from Chez Panisse, in 1966. The innovation at Peet's was to promote roasting on-site, making this North Berkeley neighborhood a center for specialty coffee in California at a time when the average cup of coffee in the U.S. was mass-produced and mediocre. So if Berkeley is the home of dark roast espresso in the United States, is there a California coffee culture as well? This session takes coffee as a point of cultural comparison, and our two presenters, one Swedish, one Californian, will present their thoughts on what it means to get a coffee in both situations. So let me start by presenting our first speaker, Stina Almroth, coming to us from Sweden. She studied international nutrition at Cornell University and embarked on a career of global health research in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Her groundbreaking research on breastfeeding directly contributed to WHO policy change. And over the years, especially in the last decade, she's been involved in a deep dive on the cultural significance of fika, the Swedish everyday ritual of meeting over coffee and pastry. Her examination of the fika culture has resulted in an award-winning book. I think she'll show you a copy of it, Fika, Made in Sweden. It was published originally in English, with a Swedish version to come. Now, the fact that the English version was published first and the fact that the subtitle Made in Sweden sounds like a branding effort for an export strategy raises some interesting questions about whether fika can travel or not. As you might expect from this introduction, Stina is going to make the argument for the cultural specificity of this particular custom around coffee and pastry. And in our second presentation, which I'll introduce after her, we'll get a comparative perspective on this. I'll be very interested in what the audience has to say about their relationship to coffee afterwards. So Stina, please come and join us.
Oj, tusen tack. Det var så bra med plast, tack. I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here and be able to introduce fika to you. Mart just gave you quick idea of fika being the everyday Swedish ritual of meeting over coffee and typically having something sweet to go along with it. That's a short version of it. And what I would like to do is to give you a sense of fika through, I hope, images. Yes. This is our princess torta with this rose. So this will be rolling there. You'll get an idea of many elements of what is fika. Now the word itself then, there are many explanations for it, but they all point to it being a slang word. And the most typical one is that it's an example of backslang, where you reverse the syllables of a word. So fika came from the old word for coffee, then kaffe. There you have it. And I must admit that when I was growing up, we never used the word. It was somehow not good. We had coffee. And so if there would be any Swede in the audience who has an aversion to the word fika, I'll completely understand you. But after discovering how multifaceted and rich our fika culture is, I think it's a perfect one word to capture all of it. And now that the word, at least, is beginning to travel internationally, and it's relatively easy to say, I think there is no turning back. Fika has come to stay. Conveniently, fika works both as a noun and a verb. I think being practical is a national trait in Sweden. And so you could say, would you like to fika with me, or would you like to come for a fika with me? And since this is a food symposium, I thought I'd better comment on how fika fits in relation to food. And when I first started exploring fika, and very few people understood that I was so excited about this, I thought that the way in was to squeeze fika into the Swedish food culture. I thought that's what I had to do. But that turned out to not be a very fruitful approach. And it was a Swedish Nobel chef who finally made that super clear to me. This was in New Delhi, and he had been flown in to cook at one of this city's 5-star hotels. And one morning, there was a public event called Meet the Chef. I thought, wow, this is my chance. Now I was going to go argue for fika into Swedish cuisine. I thought everybody else must be as excited as me, but I was the only one there, and I was ready. So I started, I understand you're here to promote Swedish food, but what about buns and cakes? He just looked at me, and it was as if I was just full of question marks, like, no, we don't do any of that. And I began feeling very disappointed. And then in a last attempt to shoehorn, I guess you call it, fika into this Swedish kitchen, I said, what about torta then? You know, torta, a layered, decorated cake. And I just knew then, that before he even said anything, that his answer was going to be no. In theory, maybe, but in practice, rarely. So there I was for a few seconds, just so clear that fika had nothing to do with food. And then just in a couple of seconds, I just flipped and I realized that no, it's because fika is such an important thing in Sweden. It's so significant that it actually forms its own cuisine. And once I had accepted this truth, of course, then I see signs outside most cafes saying they serve food and fika. And that's how we all think about it. We have food or we have fika. They're not mixed up at all. They're conceptually quite different. So then what is fika? I just realized, okay, so now I have to explain what is it. And I realized that the difference is not what you see. It's not about the pastries versus the food. Because as far as fika, that's just the props for our ritual. And I called my presentation, what has happened to this?
They went through all your slides.
But they're supposed to be rolling and rolling. Can we?
Somebody's controlling the slides.
They're supposed to just run and run and run.
They did one time through.
Yeah, but they are.
They're not repeating. Yeah.
But can they not be repeating?
We're on it.
Good. Good, we have a runner. No, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Good thing that I looked. Anyway, I actually believe that fika can be your key, your way to understanding Sweden. And make life easier for you there should you visit. And so one way is that by looking at fika, the way we do it will tell you how we do just about everything else in Sweden. It's like a lens through which to look at Sweden. As long as it keeps running, then I'm happy. Anyway, but the other way is that I'm going to talk about fika etiquette for a little bit, because I think there is no social skill that will come in more handy in Sweden than having an idea of fika etiquette, both privately and more business-like settings. And I will then start with what it tells us about our culture by using 4 words that Business Sweden, the Swedish Trade Council, uses to describe Sweden. And that's equality, sustainability, all those good words, cooperation, or in English you actually need to use 3 words for samarbete, collaboration or co-creation also, and innovation. I'll start with equality. We all know in Sweden that when it's time for fika, everybody is supposed to turn up. No exception at all. And so in a workplace, it could be a section or a department, whatever is the feasible amount of people. And that would be, the boss would be there, the youngest trainee would be there, and everybody in between. Of course, everybody can't be present every time, but that's what we strive for. You could say that it's a way to practice equality. We don't have to, we just do it because we think that's how it should be done. And at the same time, we achieve inclusion and diversity. The second word is sustainability. It's maybe most often discussed in terms of the environment, but I would like to talk about it in terms of sustainable health. which is one of the 17 UN goals. Because a fika break works as an inbuilt pause for recovery, built into your workday or your day in general. And originally, fika was introduced at the factories as a way to reduce the number of accidents in the factories. A linguistics professor has coined the term institutional freedom, which I think is an elegant way to describe the slight social pressure to attend fika. But that's brilliant also, because then when it is time for fika, you don't have to think each time, do I have time? Should I finish this job first? No, fika, you just go. And you get the benefit of that break and many more. And in addition to the physical and mental recovery, by meeting up with your colleagues day after day after day, I think it's likely that you develop more of a feeling of belonging, togetherness, trust. And it's also an opportunity to care for and be cared for. And I'll give you one example that illustrates this. At most probably workplaces, there is a list of whose turn it is to bring fika pastries for fika. And then we all know there is a gradation. Best is if you bake yourself. Second, you find the best bakery in town. And yeah, then it gets not so good. This has to do with how much care you put into it. So by baking yourself, you show that you really care. Oops, let it be. The sweetest story I know of this was a high school friend of mine. She worked at Scania in Sweden, and there was this young Indian guy it was his turn. And he had baked muffins. He'd probably never baked in his whole life back in India, I suspect. And he came with a whole tray of muffins. And the batter had flown all over the tray. It was a complete mess. But people were so moved by his effort. And I think also the fact that he knew that that was the thing to do. They appreciated his sort of cultural awareness or whatever. Now we come to collaboration or cooperation, which is also something that we practice at fika. Mundane matters like what coffee machine to purchase, sorting out vacation schedules, that's the example that's mentioned the most often, because how practical. Everybody's present, you can sit there and negotiate. I take those weeks, then you can take that. Oh, but I can do this, and then everybody can be relatively happy. And so I'd say that what you gain here is like an attitude of doing things together. And then you can apply that to more sophisticated problems. And most likely it leads to, I've discussed this with several people, increased efficiency. And you say, efficiency? Are you kidding? And I think most people might think that it's a waste of time rather than being efficient. But then I'll give you an example. It was a woman who used to think when she was younger that fika was just like sitting there with those old ladies, not for her, waste of time. But then she was writing on LinkedIn that I've come to reconsider this whole thing, she wrote. And I then contacted her and we had more of a chat. And she said, I remember if I needed help with anything, I knew immediately who to go to. And she added, and I even knew that was a woman who used to tell stories about her guinea pig. So you can see you had absolutely improved communication here. The last word, fourth word, innovation, that's my absolute favorite, because I've been living outside of Sweden a lot, and repeatedly I come across this innovation, that innovation, important innovations, and they were all Swedish. And I thought, how is this possible with our tiny population that we have so many? It was like my own question, really. And it was only when I began looking into fika that I found some clues, some possible explanations for this. Remember I told you that when it's fika time, everybody's supposed to be there. So it means in one place, around one fika table possibly, you have different ages, different educations, different roles, different absolutely everything. And to me, I'm thinking it reminds me of an incubator. And then we have something that we all know, that at fika time, there is no agenda. So anybody can contribute anything. I think that's the most magic. And so with these conditions, we ought to be innovative. We ought to come up with innovations, I think. And I told you about our tiny population, but here now finally we have the statistics on our side. Just do the math. 365 times every daily fika break, or two maybe. It should amount to some number of innovations. And when you look at, it's an annual statistics that's published, the Global Innovation Index, Sweden is number 2 after Switzerland, year after year after year. So I take that as proof of my hypothesis. So looking at it through these 4 words, I'd say they chose wisely, Business Sweden. But I would like to add one more aspect, and that's like the more human aspect, the soft side, the hard side, love actually. And it was my mentor in India who once said to me, Stina, when you bake, it's about love. I had never thought of it that way. I just baked. I thought that was the most natural thing to do. But I realized she was right. And then once I had understood it and thought about it more, I realized this love, it can be expressed many different ways, but there's a baker and pastry chef, Jan Hed, in Sweden. I'd say Sweden's most renowned person in that area. He wrote a foreword to this English book that I'll show you. And he wrote, so now he's been working as a pastry chef and baker for 60 years, but in those days, 55. And he writes, not for a single minute have I regretted my choice of profession. Think of it, to bake for somebody and see them get happy. I think it's amazing to have that as your motivation after 55 years. And then at an Indian wedding, I met an Australia-based but Indian sociologist who studies money as a medium of relationships. And she was very quick to grasp the emotional potency of fika. And she said, "Oh, it's your currency of care." I thought, yeah, right, that's exactly what it is, our currency of care. So I think that at fika you see not the stereotype of Swedes as totally impossible to talk to, cold and reserved. At the bus stop, we are exactly like that, but not at fika. And once a Swiss woman leaned over to me and it's like in confidence, "You know, I have been here for 2 months now in Sweden, and I can't talk to you guys. I mean, I thought you'd be like the Swiss, but you're not." She was very troubled, actually. And that just occurred to me to ask. I said, have you met a Swede at fika then, or? No, she hadn't, of course. And then, as I explained just a little bit, she like relaxed. And then, having read my book, she wrote on LinkedIn later that understanding about fika has opened my eyes and my soul to the Swedes. So I think it's worth telling you about our fika for that reason only. So I hope this has given you just a sense of fika and perhaps of Sweden at the same time. Now, let's imagine that you're on your way to Sweden for the first time. I know many of you have been many times. You heard that fika is serious in Sweden. So what do you need to know? What are a few do's and don'ts? So I'll give you 3 tips that I think will be helpful. 3 rules, you might say, almost. And the first one is, if somebody invites you for fika, always say, "Yes, please." There is no other possible answer. Unless you want to come across as disrespectful, rude, or completely lacking social manners. And so I'll explain what's in this through a conversation I had with 2 young salespeople at an electronics store, Elgiganten. And I said, "So is it possible can you say no to fika?" Both those guys just like at the same time said, no, you can't, no, that's... And then one of them, he felt he wanted to explain it a bit better. So he said, "You know, when you ask somebody for fika, it's like you're opening your heart." And I think that says it all. That's what you are saying yes or no to. Somebody has opened their heart. So, always say yes to fika. That was the first one. The second one is really related to that, which is when it's fika time, even though nobody comes and says, "Oh, it's fika time, you must come." No, you're just supposed to know that when it's time for fika, you're supposed to show up. Everybody. And it would be a huge mistake to think that there's anything you could be involved in that would be more important than showing up for fika. So whatever you think about it, and you probably, if you're not familiar with it, you will think that, God, when are these people going to work? And when am I going to get some peace to work? But my advice is, show up. I'll add to this. There was a Swedish woman who'd been working in one place where there was a lot of fika, Second one, no fika. They had no time. Third place, all of a sudden there was fika, but she didn't even think of it. And after a while, a colleague came up to her and said, "Are you a snob?" And she's like, "Oh, no, yeah, well, no, I know, but fika." And then, so it is quite serious. And the final tip, you might have almost guessed it. If you really want to impress Swedes, then bring some fika pastries. And even better, you bake them yourself. So, always yes to fika, always show up for fika, and bring some fika pastries. I think the Swedes in the room will agree that these tips might come in handy. So this is still just a glimpse of our Swedish fika culture. And you might have noticed I haven't said a word about the pastries. And we have many very, very wonderful pastries. And I'd say our greatest culinary contribution is in the area of sweet buns. And there are many more kind of sweet buns to discover than our iconic cinnamon bun. Now, from my enthusiasm, you might conclude that I'm exaggerating about fika, but I'd say it's the contrary. And I'd go as far as saying that Sweden without fika would not be Sweden. And at the same time, in Sweden, we are masters at the practice of fika, but we don't see our own culture. I don't think anybody sees our own culture. We just take it for granted. It's something we do, and we don't think of it even. A little bit like we speak Swedish, but it's not like we're consulting the grammar up in our head every time. But this is, you might have seen some pictures now passing by. I'd say awareness of fika is growing, and we are beginning to see the potential for using fika as a brand ambassador, what you mentioned there, Mark. So in the 2025, this year's new brand strategy, fika is listed as one of the brand fundamentals, along with the Nobel Prize and IKEA. Fika is moving up in the world, I'd say. And I think it's well-deserved also, actually, my enthusiasm. And even more recently, Visit Sweden, which is the tourist agency for global travelers, launched a campaign that they called the Swedish prescription. This is a prescription for a healthy lifestyle, which obviously Sweden is the first, they claim, country to offer. That's not quite true. But anyway, Visit Sweden really did their homework and collected evidence of the benefits of various health style things. And fika is one of them, of course. And so I called the professor that they had asked to scrutinize this evidence. And I remember her saying two things. One was, she said they could be a little bit less bold. Like she felt they were exaggerating a little bit, like being the first, not quite true. And then she said, and of course, fika is super important. I remember that's why our best research ideas came up. And I think that's a comment that I've heard, I don't know how many times, when you bring the topic of fika up, then, yeah, that's where I learned this, and this is where that idea came, is super common. So if I've managed to spark your interest in fika, and you would like to learn some more, then there is this, my book, Fika, Made in Sweden. And the reason for the subtitle was my realization at the time that fika was just so Swedish, so uniquely Swedish. And I haven't changed my mind about that since. There are cultures where there are coffee rituals, tea rituals, in the UK, Turkey, Japan. Yeah, but fika is very particularly Swedish, I would say. And yeah, you mentioned that soon. So I started in English. I actually thought it was only people who didn't live in Sweden who needed to know about fika. I skipped ourselves. But then finally I realized that we need our own book about fika to understand what the thing we've actually created. And yeah. So I haven't found a US distributor for this book yet, but it can be shipped easily, and I do have a few copies with me. And then there's also the Fika Academy that you mentioned. We've just started, but my vision is that we'll have a newsletter and that you can sign up to pay something so that it's worth something to you, like 100 crowns. Because I think fika is really for everybody, and that same way, the Fika Academy can be for everybody. And that's a way also to keep up with what's happening on the fika front. I've really enjoyed having this chance to share fika with you. Thank you so much. And maybe we'll meet over fika, even in Sweden.